I was 14 the first time I tried to end my life. I'd been hurt by people who were supposed to protect me, not even my mother. Hi, my name is Christina. I'm a mom of 3 and now a grandmother. For most of my childhood, I lived in silence. But this isn't just a story about surviving. It's about healing in a quiet room with yellow curtains, falling in love with a man who never asked for explanations, and building a life I never thought I deserved, with children, a garden, and grace. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you listening from? Wherever you are, I hope this story finds you gently. If it speaks to your heart, I'd love for you to share your thoughts below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, feel free to follow along. There's more light ahead. Every morning around 7, the same golden light poured through Christina's kitchen window. It wasn't remarkable, just soft and steady, stretching over her porcelain teacups and the potted basil she kept near the sink. But from my porch across the street, that light felt like a quiet promise she was still here. I remember the day she moved back to Maplewood. It was spring, and the forsythia bushes were just starting to bloom behind the bakery. I saw her step out of a rust-colored SUV, holding a toddler in one arm and a bag of homemade candles in the other. She looked tired, like someone who had walked through fire and somehow made it through without turning to ash. But it wasn't her face that struck me. It was the way she held the child close and protective, like she was carrying something she'd waited her whole life to find. My name is Ruth. I'm 75, retired, and I run a small YouTube channel called Grandparents' Tales. Nothing fancy, just stories I tell from my kitchen table, usually while something's baking in the oven. Mostly, I share bits of family memories, small-town happenings, and the kind of stories folks used to whisper on porches after supper. But last week, as I stood by the window and watched Christina wipe the fog from her glass, I realized her story needed telling. She didn't know I was watching that morning. Or maybe she did. The way she paused, her hand resting on the windowsill as the sun caught her hair, it felt reverent, like she was remembering something or someone. That's when I saw her left wrist lift slightly toward the light as if reaching, just for a moment, enough to catch the faint silver of a scar. Not many people in town know what Christina's been through. They know she owns Grace Light, the candle shop, with the calming lavender scent and handwritten notes tucked into each jar. They know she has 3 boys, all grown now, and a granddaughter named Ella, who toddles around in tiny rain boots chasing butterflies and snack crumbs. They know she's kind, keeps to herself, and volunteers at the shelter every Thanksgiving. But they don't know why she came back. Not really. The day we truly reconnected was at Miller's Grocery. I was buying cinnamon for my pies. My late husband always said I overdid it, and he was probably right. Christina was at the dairy aisle with Ella on her hip. The baby reached for a block of cheddar with chubby fingers, and Christina laughed a soft, almost shy sound, like she hadn't used it in a while. She noticed me and smiled. There was something familiar in her eyes, something not lost, but buried. "Mrs. Ruth," she asked gently. I nodded, surprised she remembered. "You gave me peppermint sticks when I was little, every Sunday after church. And you always said they were too spicy, but kept taking more," I replied. She chuckled. "Ella's starting to like peppermint now, too." I told her she had the same calm presence her grandmother once had. That made her pause. Not many people talk about her family anymore. After that, we began to exchange more than smiles. I brought her apple pie one afternoon. She gave me a small lavender candle wrapped in linen. We never talked directly about the past, until one morning she left a small package on my porch. Inside was a letter, short, handwritten, no dramatic words, no heavy ink, just, "You once said stories matter more when they're passed on with kindness. This is mine. If you still have room in your stories, I think I'm ready. Christina." I sat at my kitchen table, letter in hand kettle, whistling behind me. Outside, the maple leaves were beginning to turn, and through her kitchen window, that familiar soft light poured in once more. So I opened a fresh journal, wrote the date, and this sentence: she was 10 years old when she stopped speaking, not because she couldn't, but because no one listened. That is where I'll begin. This is not a tale of monsters and darkness. It's the story of a girl who survived silence, built a life with light, and now cradles a grandchild in arms that once only knew how to tremble. And so if you're listening, dear hearts, let me take you back to a little girl in Maplewood, a church pew on Sunday, and the first time her voice began to disappear. Back in the fall of 1990, our little church on Maplewood Lane had 15 pews and a cross that squeaked in the wind. It wasn't much, a humble white clapboard building with hymnals missing half their pages, but every Sunday, like clockwork, little Christina Dunlap sat in the second pew from the front. Always the second, always alone even when she was surrounded. She wore dresses with stiff collars and bows that didn't quite match. Her hair was always neat, combed flat with a single barrette, but her eyes, oh, those eyes. They looked like winter, not the stormy kind, but the stillness after snow when sound disappears and nothing moves. She didn't fidget, didn't swing her legs like the other girls. She folded her hands so tight you could see the little half moons her nails left on her palms. And when the choir sang, "It is well with my soul," I'd glance over and wonder, was it? Her father, Dean, was a plumber, quiet man, never missed a Sunday. Sat 2 pews behind, usually with a thermos of coffee he tried to hide. Her mother, Margaret, played piano for the choir. She had the sort of smile you'd expect from a Sunday school poster, gentle, distant, and not quite warm. But it was Uncle Ray who made me uneasy. He wasn't family, just an old army buddy of Dean's who showed up one summer and never quite left. Broad-shouldered, always in a flannel shirt, always cracking jokes too loud. The kind of man who made you laugh without knowing why you were laughing. He sat beside Christina every Sunday, his arm casually behind her on the pew, fingers resting on the wood, a little too close to her shoulder. Back then I didn't say anything. None of us did. It wasn't like we saw anything wrong. He brought candy. He braided her doll's hair during potlucks. Once he carried her on his shoulders at the church fair, and Margaret laughed like it was the most normal thing in the world. But I noticed that Christina always flinched when he touched her back, just slightly. A pause in the breath, a shift in the eyes. Small things you only see when you're watching like a grandmother watches a little too closely, a little too late. One Sunday, I handed her a peppermint stick after the service. She took it, whispered, "Thank you," and slipped it into her pocket without unwrapping it. She never ate them. Now I know why. Looking back, the signs were there, clear as candlelight, but we were all too caught up in casseroles and committee meetings to see. There was one moment that sticks with me most. The church was mostly empty Wednesday evening prayer, just a few folks around. I had come early to place hymnals back in order. Christina was sitting in the second pew, alone again, legs tucked under, looking straight ahead. Not at the cross, but at the stained glass to the left, blue and gold shaped like an open hand. Uncle Ray entered from the back footsteps, loud on the wooden floor. She didn't turn around, but her shoulders, they tensed sharp and fast, like a string pulled tight. He walked past me, tipped his head, said, "Evening, Miss Ruth." I nodded, but my eyes were on her. And her eyes, they never blinked. Not once. That night I went home uneasy. I remember baking pumpkin bread and leaving it in the oven too long. The top cracked like something brittle had broken inside. I still regret not asking her then. You see, it's easy to miss the quiet girls. They don't complain. They don't throw tantrums. They fold into themselves like origami hearts, delicate, neat, easily hidden. And sometimes they disappear while still sitting in plain view. Later, I would learn from Christina herself that those Sundays in the second pew were the only times she felt safe, because in church she was never left alone with him. He wasn't allowed to take her to the restroom or walk her home from Sunday school. That hour, however short, was her breath. And yet no one noticed when that breath turned shallow. So if you're ever in a church and you see a child sitting too still, smiling too little, holding her hands too tight, don't just offer her a peppermint stick. Ask her if she's okay, and listen with more than your ears. Because the second pew remembers everything, even if we don't. Some girls disappear in a moment. Christina disappeared in inches. By the time she was 13, her long hair was always tied back, pulled so tight it looked like a mask. She wore sweaters, even in July sleeves, stretching past her wrists like armor. She still sat quietly in class, earned straight A's, and smiled when spoken to, but that smile was thin, practiced, like a photograph kept in someone else's frame. One afternoon, I ran into her teacher, Miss Wilson, at the library book sale. She was sorting through a box of used mysteries, and I asked how Christina was doing in school. "She's quiet," Miss Wilson said, like that explained everything. "Withdrawn, but no trouble." I nodded. Trouble, you see, always got attention. Quiet girls. Girls who shrank into the corners didn't raise alarms. They passed through life like shadows under closed doors. Later, I found out Christina had tried to show her teacher a journal. She'd stayed behind after class, holding it with both hands like a baby bird. Miss Wilson had taken it, glanced at the cover, and handed it back. "You should talk to your parents first," she said. Christina never opened it again. Around that time, she also started seeing the school nurse, Mrs. Lang, more often. Headaches, stomach cramps, fainting spells. But every time they checked her vitals, everything seemed normal. Once the nurse asked if things were okay at home. Christina shrugged and said, "I'm just tired." That's the thing about certain kinds of pain. They don't show up on thermometers or x-rays. They live in the silence between questions people are too afraid to ask. I remember once around that same year, I was volunteering at the church food pantry. Christina walked in with her mother, Margaret. Her mother's hair was perfect as always, her sweater bright pink. Christina trailed behind in a gray hoodie 3 sizes too big. They didn't stay long. Margaret signed the sheet, thanked the volunteers, and ushered Christina out with a hand on her back that looked more like steering than comfort. Afterward, one of the ladies whispered, "That girl never looks people in the eye." "She's shy," someone else offered. No one said more. No one wanted to say more. That winter, Christina ended up at the doctor's office again, this time with bruises on her arms and ribs. She told the nurse she'd fallen down the stairs. The doctor looked concerned, but not alarmed. "Kids fall," he said, "especially skinny ones." He gave her a vitamin prescription and sent her home. What he didn't know, what no one saw, was that the bruises weren't from falling. They were from being grabbed too hard, from being silenced when she tried to resist, from nights when doors didn't lock and voices turned into threats whispered against her ear. But how do you explain that at 13? How do you tell someone your own home feels like a cage? Christina tried once more. She left her journal on the kitchen table with a note that said, "Please believe me." Her mother found it, read 3 lines, then tore the pages out one by one and fed them to the fireplace. Later that night, Christina stared at the embers long after they faded. She told me years later that the smell of burning paper still makes her flinch. You see, people think the worst part of trauma is the pain itself, but sometimes it's the indifference that haunts you more. The knowing that someone could have stopped it and didn't. The next time I saw Christina was at the Christmas pageant. She stood on stage in a tinsel halo, reading from Luke 2, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy." Her voice didn't tremble. Her face was calm, but her sleeves covered every inch of her arms, and she didn't look at the audience once. I baked sugar cookies that night and left them in a tin on her porch. She never mentioned them. But months later, I noticed the tin was still there, empty but clean. Like someone had taken the offering quietly and tried to believe that kindness might still be real. That was the last winter Christina was still trying to speak. After that, she stopped altogether, And no one, not her teachers, not the nurses, not even her own mother, asked why. Because sometimes people don't want to see. Seeing means responsibility. Seeing means acting. And in Maplewood, we were good at potlucks and prayer circles, but not so good at facing what didn't fit the script. But I saw her, not clearly, not fully, but enough to wonder why my heart sank every time she walked by. Sometimes I wonder if that journal, those pages in the fire, could have changed something. Maybe not the past, but maybe the speed at which she disappeared. It was a Tuesday in March. Rain had just started to fall soft and steady, like a lullaby gone wrong. I remember because I'd left my bedroom window cracked, and the scent of wet pavement crept in with the morning breeze. That was the day Christina disappeared. Not in the dramatic, flashing headlines kind of way. There was no siren, no missing posters stapled to light poles. She simply didn't show up at school, or church, or anywhere people had grown used to seeing her quiet, small, unnoticed. I heard about it from the clerk at the post office. She must be sick, he said, stuffing mail into slots. Funny, though, her mama picked up her books from the school like it was any other day. But it wasn't. The night before, Christina had climbed out of her bedroom window barefoot. She carried nothing but a folded scrap of paper in her sweater pocket and a heart cracked too many times to hold. She walked 2 miles through the rain. No shoes, no plan, just one intention. At the old rail bridge near the edge of town, she stopped. The water below was swollen from spring storms, dark and fast. People say drowning is peaceful, but I've heard Christina say otherwise. It felt like falling into silence that never ends. But she didn't fall. Not all the way. A nurse named Caroline was driving home late from a double shift. Her headlights caught a figure near the guardrail, small, soaked, and still. Something told her to stop. She always said later it was the way the girl's hands gripped the railing, like someone holding on and letting go all at once. Caroline pulled over, walked slowly, called out gently. Christina turned her head, just slightly, and whispered, "It doesn't matter." But it did. Caroline didn't ask questions. She just held out a dry blanket from her back seat and said, "Let's get warm first." Christina stepped back, just a half step, but then her knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the gravel, not from drama, from exhaustion, from holding too much too long in a body too small to bear it. Caroline drove her to the emergency room. Christina had hypothermia, minor cuts on her feet, and a heartbeat that stuttered when she heard loud voices. I didn't know any of this until weeks later, when the pastor quietly announced during service that the Dunlaps are going through a personal family matter. Please keep them in prayer. No one asked. No casseroles were made. No prayer chains were started. The town moved on, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about that quiet girl in the second pew, about the peppermint sticks she never unwrapped, about the way she flinched when Uncle Ray laughed too loud, and mostly about how someone had to walk 2 miles in the rain before anyone noticed she was missing. Christina didn't return home. The state placed her in temporary care. Protective custody, they called it, though. Protection should have come much earlier. At first, Margaret denied everything, said Christina was troubled, sensitive, prone to drama. She just wants attention, she told the caseworker. She's making it up. But when Christina was examined by the hospital's trauma unit, the truth came out. Not in screams, not in accusations, but in the way her body flinched at certain questions, in the medical records that no longer looked like coincidence, and in the quiet, unwavering way she said, "I tried to tell them. No one listened." That sentence would stay with me for years. I kept baking that week muffins, pies, biscuits, anything to keep my hands moving. I left a tin of lemon cookies at the church office marked with her name. I don't know if she ever got them, but I hoped she knew someone was still thinking of her. Later, much later, Christina told me that the hardest part wasn't the hurt. It was the silence after. The world didn't stop, she said. It just kept going like I hadn't nearly vanished. I don't remember what I said in reply, but I do remember thinking, Sometimes disappearing is the only way to be seen. And on that quiet Tuesday in March under gray skies and the hush of spring rain, Christina Dunlap disappeared so she could finally survive. The first thing Christina noticed was the yellow curtains. Not sunshine yellow, not the kind that shouts. They were soft like butter left out on a summer windowsill. The kind of yellow that whispers instead of sings. The kind that makes you feel like maybe morning could be gentle again. The room itself wasn't large, just a twin bed with a navy blanket, a small wooden desk with a dented lamp, and a closet with one missing doorknob. But those curtains, they caught the light in a way that made the entire space feel less like a shelter and more like a beginning. Christina had arrived late in the afternoon. The social worker Mandy had driven her 3 hours from the hospital to a residential center for girls in Eugene. Christina barely spoke during the ride. She clutched a backpack filled with nothing but a sweatshirt and the worn notebook the nurse Caroline had handed back to her with quiet reverence. "This is just a place to rest," Mandy had said, unlocking the door to the small room. "You're safe here. No one will come in without knocking." Christina nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. That night, she slept curled tight against the wall knees, drawn up arms wrapped around a pillow. No dreams, just a vast quiet. The next morning, Mandy brought her a cinnamon roll and a mug of cocoa. She set it gently on the desk without a word, then turned to leave. Before the door closed, she paused and said, "Some of the girls like to open the window just a crack. It smells like rain this time of year." When Christina finally got out of bed, she touched the curtain. It was warmer than she expected. Later that week, she met Hannah, her new roommate. Hannah was a tall, lanky girl with messy curls and a habit of humming songs Christina didn't recognize. She was 15, wore flannel shirts too big for her frame, and decorated her side of the room with postcards from thrift stores. "You like yellow?" Hannah asked, pointing at the curtains. Christina shrugged. "I don't know." "Me neither," Hannah replied. "But they're not gray. That's a start." Over time, Christina learned the rhythms of the house. Breakfast at 7, group therapy at 9, school in the afternoon, lights out by 10. The staff was kind but firm. They didn't ask questions unless you offered. No one touched you without permission. And every room had a small sign above the door that read, "You are seen." Christina didn't speak much, but she wrote. At night, while Hannah snored softly in the next bed, Christina filled pages of her journal. Not about what had happened, not yet, but about little things, like how the window made the rain look silver, or how cocoa tasted different when you weren't afraid someone would take it away. One day, during a one-on-one session, the center's counselor, Dr. Turner, asked, "What do you remember about the day you left home?" Christina stared at her hands for a long time. Then she whispered, "I remember the silence afterward, that it felt heavier than anything before." Dr. Turner nodded. She didn't interrupt. Just let the silence sit between them softer this time. Later that week, something unexpected happened. Hannah found Christina crying in the bathroom, not sobbing, just silent tears slipping down as she stared into the mirror. "I don't want to be broken anymore," Christina said, her voice raw. Without a word, Hannah walked over and wrapped her arms around her. Not tight, not sudden, just enough. "You're not broken," she whispered. "You're still here." That night, Christina slept without curling up. She lay flat, her hands on her stomach, eyes closed against the soft yellow light from the curtain edges. I remember Mandy told me once years later, it was the cocoa, I think, or the curtain, or the fact that no one pushed. But I think it was the room itself, a space without fear, a space that didn't demand a story or a performance, just a breath. Christina told me that was the first place I cried and didn't get punished, the first place where silence didn't feel like hiding. And every night after Mandy left a small note beside her cocoa, "Still here." It's funny what can save us. Sometimes it's not therapy or rescue plans. Sometimes It's just yellow curtains and someone who doesn't look away. Some people heal by speaking. Christina healed by writing what she could never say out loud. It started with an assignment. Dr. Turner handed each girl a blank envelope and a single piece of stationery. Write a letter, she said, to anyone. You don't have to send it. You don't even have to sign it. But write it as if you could. The girls groaned. One wrote to her dog, another to her third-grade teacher. Christina wrote to her mother. She sat by the window in the rec room, the yellow curtains fluttering at the edges of her memory. The paper stayed blank for a while. Then slowly she began, "Dear Mom, you always said I was dramatic, that I imagined things, that I needed to grow up. But the things I imagined never left bruises." She folded the page neatly when she finished. Didn't cry, didn't ask what to do next. She just tucked it into the envelope and slid it under her pillow. A few days later, she wrote another, this time to Uncle Ray. "You told me not to tell. You said I'd ruin everything. But you ruined birthdays. You ruined sleep. You ruined the sound of a door opening." She didn't burn that letter. She buried it. Out back behind the garden beds, the girls tended on weekends. The soil was damp and the paper curled like a leaf in her palm. Some things she said later don't deserve to stay inside you. After that, the letters came often. Some long, others just a few lines. She wrote to teachers who looked away, to the doctor who dismissed her bruises, to the pastor who never asked why she flinched during hugs. She even wrote to herself, her younger self, on pink notepaper with a drawing of a sun in the corner. "You are not invisible. You are not wrong. You are not what happened to you." That letter she kept. Christina never shared her letters in group, but she started leaving folded pages in the cracks of trees, in library books under chapel pews. Tiny messages that no one knew were hers. Whispers that maybe someday someone like her would find them and feel a little less alone. I remember the first time she mailed something again. Mandy gave her a postcard to decorate for a holiday art contest. Christina drew a field of sunflowers and wrote "Hope returns in quiet ways." She didn't win, but the counselor framed it and hung it in the hallway. By that winter, Christina had filled an entire notebook with letters. Dr. Turner asked if she wanted to keep them or let them go. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting," she said. "It means you're ready to carry it differently." Christina chose to keep 3. The rest she tore into strips soaked in lavender oil and folded into origami cranes with Hannah's help. They hung the cranes on a wire across the window, and every time the wind blew through the curtains, they danced quiet, graceful, never screaming for attention. Years later, Christina told me that was the moment she realized she could reshape her pain, not erase it, not pretend it never happened, but turn it into something less sharp. "Letters don't need a reply to matter," she said. "Sometimes they just need to leave your chest." I never saw those letters, never read a word, but I imagine one of them might have said something like this: "Dear someone, I'm still here, and that counts for something." Because sometimes surviving is not about fighting. It's about whispering what no one let you say and writing your way back to yourself. There was a little yellow house tucked behind Petal and Stem, the flower shop, just 2 blocks from the train station in Eugene. It had chipped paint, 1 crooked window, and a front porch too small for rocking chairs. But to Christina, it looked like freedom. She moved in 3 weeks after her 18th birthday. No more shared bedrooms, no more therapy charts on the wall, no more knock before enter rules that reminded her she was still someone's responsibility. Just her, a key, and a future no one else had planned. The house came with the job weekend cashier at Petal and Stem, sweeping up petals, arranging daisies, and learning to smile at customers, even when her heart still forgot how. The owner, Jo, was a widow in her 60s, with silver braids and the sharpest eyes Christina had ever seen. "You don't talk much," Jo said on her second day. Christina looked down. Never been very good at it. Jo handed her a pair of pruning shears. "That's all right. Flowers don't talk either, but they still bloom when they're ready." Every morning, Christina opened the shop at 7. She brewed cinnamon tea, wiped the counters, and watched the sun slide across the sidewalk like a quiet promise. At night, she returned to the little yellow house where she kept books stacked by the windowsill and a small candle lit by her bedside. She didn't have much: 1 blanket, 2 mugs, a thrifted coat she mended herself, but it was hers. Sometimes on Sundays, she walked to the river with a journal in her bag and a peanut butter sandwich in her hand. She'd sit under the same tree each time a willow with branches that bent toward the water like they were listening, and write whatever came. Not letters anymore, just thoughts, questions, like, what if healing isn't about forgetting? Or what does safe really feel like? Joe never asked about her past, but one evening, Christina caught her reading a worn paperback behind the register. The title read, "Surviving the Quiet Stories from Girls Who Stayed Silent." Joe looked up, eyes steady. "I didn't write it," she said, "but I could have." They didn't speak of it again. But from then on, Christina noticed that Joe left out extras: a second cookie with tea, a scarf on the coldest mornings, a small card tucked into her pay envelope that simply read, "You're doing beautifully." It wasn't love, not the big cinematic kind, but it was care. And for someone like Christina, who had spent years learning that not all kindness came with a catch that was more than enough. The house creaked at night. Sometimes the faucet leaked. Once the heater stopped working in December, and she had to sleep in 3 layers under a pile of coats. But when she turned 20, Christina bought her first plant, a tiny pot of rosemary, and placed it on the kitchen sill. "Smells like something whole," she whispered. That same week, she wrote her first resume, walked into a candle shop 2 neighborhoods away, and asked if they needed help. The manager, a young mom named Tasha, said, "We're looking for someone who can stay calm during rush hours. You good under pressure?" Christina nodded. "I've lived through worse than candles." She got the job. When she told Joe, the older woman just smiled, handed her a bunch of tulips, and said, "I figured you'd outgrow me eventually." Christina stayed in that house 2 years, long enough for the flowers to change with the seasons, for laughter to echo off her kitchen walls, and for her to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't running anymore. She was building, and somewhere between cleaning dusty shelves and watering herbs on her porch, Christina became something no one had called her in years. Steady. Not healed, not whole, but steady enough to hold joy without dropping it. The first time Ben touched her hand, Christina nearly pulled away, not because she was afraid of him, but because she wasn't sure her body knew how to be touched without bracing for pain. They met at the candle shop. He wasn't handsome in the way books describe: no chiseled jaw or smoldering stare. He was soft, freckled, wore glasses that slid down his nose when he laughed. He smelled like warm soap and the faintest trace of cedar. He bought the same candle every month, sandalwood and vanilla, and always smiled like he had a secret he wasn't ready to share. One day while she was restocking a shelf, he said, "You make these, don't you?" She looked up, cautious. "Sometimes." "I knew it. They feel kind." He blushed after he said it. "Is that a weird thing to say?" Christina smiled. "No, just not something people usually notice." They began with small things: shared lunches on the shop's back steps, walks to the farmer's market, coffee in paper cups with their names misspelled the same way every time. Ben didn't ask about her past, didn't try to fix anything. He just showed up, again and again, like clockwork but kinder. Once while walking home, it started to rain. Christina stopped under a tree, pulled her coat tighter. Ben handed her his scarf, soft, clean, still warm from his neck. She hesitated, her throat tightened. "I don't need saving," she whispered. He nodded. "Good. I wouldn't know how, but I could sit with you, in the rain, if that helps." It was the first time she cried in front of someone without apologizing. In the months that followed, their connection grew not with fireworks, but with steady candles, dinners made from scratch, books passed between them with dog-eared pages, a jar on the counter where they dropped notes to each other. You made the eggs perfect. You're my favorite quiet. When he reached for her hand one evening, Christina didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, solid, gentle, she told him eventually. Not all at once, not with full detail, but enough. Enough for him to understand why she sometimes flinched when someone knocked too loudly, why she slept with the closet door open, why certain songs made her leave the room. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "I'll protect you." He just kissed the inside of her wrist, the spot where an old scar once lived, and said, "You're here. That's what matters." Christina had never known what love looked like when it wasn't tangled with fear. But Ben never raised his voice, never mocked her silence, never made her feel like she had to earn affection. He just let her be. And in that letting, she bloomed. The first time they said, "I love you," it was during a grocery run. They stood in front of the cereal aisle, arguing over granola versus oatmeal. Christina reached for a box, knocked it over, and groaned. Ben laughed, picked it up, and said, "I love you even if you're wrong about cereal." She froze, then smiled. "Say it again." He did. Later that night, wrapped in a blanket on their couch, Christina whispered, "I think I believe you." He looked at her with that same steady gaze. "That's all I need." Somewhere between the scent of candle wax and fresh coffee, between gentle fingers and grocery lists, Christina learned that love could be safe. That touch didn't have to bruise. That warmth could come from something as simple as another heartbeat nearby. And every time she held his hand, she felt something stir, something old and wounded, but healing. A quiet voice inside her that said, "Maybe I was meant to be loved like this all along." The garden started with one tomato plant. Christina had never planned on planting anything. Her hands had known more silence than soil, more retreat than reach. But when her oldest Matthew came home from kindergarten with a packet of seeds and a grin missing 2 front teeth, she couldn't say no. "Mrs. Paulson says we can grow food," he declared, waving the packet like a treasure map. She smiled. "Well, then I guess we'll need dirt." By the time summer came, there were rows of basil strawberries that never quite ripened evenly, and 3 boys who thought watering the garden meant spraying each other until someone cried. Matthew was the responsible one, always checking the leaves, running his little fingers along the stems like a doctor doing checkups. Eli, the middle boy, preferred dirt. He didn't care what they grew, he just liked digging. He once buried a sandwich to feed the worms. And then there was Theo, the youngest, the one with curls that never laid flat and questions that never ended. He didn't plant. He didn't dig. He watched, sat on the back steps with a stuffed giraffe, and kept the garden company. Christina, now in her early 30s, found herself watching them the way she once watched the sunrise through a window in a different life, with wonder, with hesitation, with awe. Some days were loud, spilled milk, shoes lost in the mud, bedtime stories that turned into wrestling matches. Other days were slow, sun-warmed laundry popsicles on the porch dandelions placed behind ears. But always, always there was the garden. Ben built a little fence around it, white pickets with one slightly crooked from Eli's soccer ball. Christina painted the names of each plant on small rocks. Lavender, mint, zucchini, joy. Yes, she named one Joy, not because she expected it to grow, but because saying the word out loud still felt brave. One afternoon, as she knelt to pull weeds, Theo plopped beside her and whispered, "Do you think God puts love in dirt?" She looked at him, startled. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "Because things grow even after we forget about them." Christina paused, and for a moment she wasn't in her yard. She was back in that yellow-curtained room, her knees pulled to her chest, holding a journal like a lifeline. She touched the soil beside him, warm, alive. "Yes," she said, "I think he does." That fall during parent-teacher conferences, Matthew's teacher said he's kind, gentle. He helps the other kids clean up even when it's not his mess. Christina blinked quickly. "He gets that from his dad," she said. But in her heart she whispered, "He gets that from all the things I fought to become." There were hard days, too. Days when the past came rushing back. When a door slammed too loud, or a boy cried in the night, and Christina's breath caught in her chest. But then she'd hear the patter of small feet, feel arms wrap around her knees, smell soap and crayons and peanut butter, and the past would quiet again. Each boy carried a piece of her healing. Matthew reminded her that responsibility didn't have to be heavy. Eli showed her how joy could be messy and full of motion. Quiet Theo, taught her how to sit still with wonder and not run away. And in between spilled juice and mismatched socks, Christina found something she never thought she'd claim: peace. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that plants roots deeper than fear. So every spring she planted again: tomatoes, sunflowers, basil, and every night she tucked 3 little boys into bed, kissed their brows, and whispered the same thing: you are loved, and nothing will ever unplant that. The journal had been wrapped in a tea towel and tucked into the back of her closet behind a box of baby shoes and an old Halloween costume with missing buttons. Christina hadn't opened it in years. It wasn't that she forgot about it, more that she'd been waiting for a moment when the words inside wouldn't feel like fire. It was a Tuesday, rainy soft. Theo had just started preschool, and the house was unusually quiet. She'd planned to fold laundry, maybe bake banana bread. But instead she found herself on the floor of the closet, knees pressed to the carpet, pulling the journal free, like someone retrieving a part of themselves they'd buried on purpose. The cover was worn, the edges curled. She ran her fingers along the spine, remembering the way she used to press so hard when she wrote, as if making the words permanent could make the pain more real to someone, anyone who might read them. She carried it to the kitchen table, poured a cup of chamomile tea, sat, and opened it. The first page read, "Dear Mom, the bruises are real." Her breath caught. She turned the pages slowly. There were entries from the shelter, letters to herself, descriptions of sleepless nights, of voices behind closed doors, of the cold metal of a door lock she used to twist 3 times before bed. But there were also lines like, "I want to believe people are good. Maybe one day I'll have a kitchen with sunflowers. I wonder what my laugh will sound like when it's not afraid." Christina didn't cry, not like before. The tears that came were soft, not grief exactly, more like recognition. Later that afternoon, when Ben came home, she was still sitting at the table, the journal open beside her, now full of yellow sticky notes she'd added. He paused in the doorway, sensing something different. "I found my voice," she said. He pulled out the chair across from her. "I think you've had it for a long time. I want to share it," she said quietly. "Not everything, but maybe enough. For the girls who still think they're alone." Ben nodded. "How?" She glanced at the candle burning near the window, lavender and cedar. "I think I want to tell my story. Write it, maybe speak it." The words felt brave in her mouth. That weekend, Christina recorded a video on her phone. Nothing fancy, just her sitting in her backyard garden, birds chirping in the background. She began, "My name is Christina. For years I lived like a shadow, but I want you to know that healing is real, that you are not broken, that silence doesn't have to be forever." She didn't post it right away, just saved it, watched it once, hand over her heart. Then she emailed it to Joe. That night, Joe replied, "Your voice could light up 10,000 candles. Don't stop now." Christina knew it wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about applause. It was about reclaiming something. That journal had once been a cry in the dark. Now it was proof that even the quietest voices could echo. So she bought a new notebook, bright blue, clean pages. And on the first line she wrote, "This time I write not because no one listened, but because someone finally did." It was a Wednesday morning in early spring. The daffodils in Christina's front yard were just beginning to open small yellow trumpets, peeking through soil that had known both frost and sun. She was folding laundry in the kitchen when the knock came, soft, measured, like someone unsure if they belonged. She peeked through the curtain, heart tightening in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was Margaret, her mother, older now, thinner, wearing a beige coat too heavy for the season and holding a small paper bag in both hands like it might fly away if she loosened her grip. Christina opened the door, slowly. They stared at each other for a long moment. No words. Just the space between them crowded with things neither had said in decades. "Hello, Christina," Margaret said, voice low. "You look, well," Christina didn't move. "I am." Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. "I was in town," her mother said, eyes darting to the daffodils. "Saw your name on a candle label at the co-op." "I own that line," Christina replied. "Grace Light." Margaret nodded. "It suits you." There was another pause. "I don't want to intrude," she added quickly. I had something to give you." She extended the paper bag. Christina didn't take it at first, but then curiosity reflexed something else. She reached out. Inside was a small music box. "I found it when I was packing up the attic," Margaret said. "It was yours. You used to wind it before bed." Christina turned it in her hands. The paint had faded, a corner chipped, but when she wound the key, it still played, soft and uncertain. "Why now?" she asked, eyes steady. Margaret looked down. "I saw your video, the one you recorded in the garden." Christina stiffened. Her mother continued. "You said you wanted someone to listen. I heard it." Another beat. "I don't expect forgiveness," Margaret whispered. "I just wanted you to know. I see now. What I didn't then." The wind stirred the daffodils. Inside, Christina heard Theo's laughter echo from the living room. Ben was reading to the boys, a world Margaret had never been part of. "You didn't believe me," Christina said quietly. "You read my words and burned them." Margaret's eyes welled. "I was afraid. I thought if I didn't look at it, it wouldn't be true. But it was. And I'm sorry." Christina closed her eyes. She remembered the fireplace, the smell of ash, the way silence felt heavier than rage. But she also remembered a room with yellow curtains, and Ben's steady voice, and the journal she'd filled page after page without needing anyone's permission. She looked at her mother again. "You don't get to rewrite the past," she said gently. "But you showed up. That counts for something." Margaret nodded, lips trembling. Christina stepped aside. "You want tea?" The older woman blinked. Yes." They sat in the kitchen. The kettle whistled. The music box sat between them, playing every few minutes when the wind turned just right. They didn't talk about the worst of it, not then, but they spoke of daffodils, of candle scents, of how Theo loved peanut butter more than anything. And for the first time in 30 years, Margaret asked Christina a question she'd never dared before. "What made you stay alive?" Christina took a sip of tea. "The hope that someday someone would ask me just that." Ella called her Mimi. Not Grandma, not Nana. Just Mimi, short, soft, easy to say with a mouthful of applesauce. Christina had never imagined herself as anyone's grandmother. For so many years, she'd simply tried to be here, to survive, to build a life out of pieces that once felt unfit for holding anything good. But then came Ella, all 6 pounds of her, with dark curls, a voice like a morning bird, and fingers that curled around Christina's thumb like she'd been waiting her whole life to find it. Matthew, now grown, had called her on a rainy Thursday. "She's here, Mom," he said, voice cracked with joy. "And she's perfect." Christina drove 2 hours through misty highways, a thermos of peppermint tea in her cup holder, and 3 hand-knitted blankets in the back seat. The hospital room was warm and full of laughter, but when she held Ella for the first time, the world went quiet, just the rise and fall of breath, the soft flutter of a tiny chest. "She smells like new beginnings," Christina whispered. That night back home, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote a letter, not because something was wrong, but because something was beautifully, perfectly right. "Dear Ella, I was once a little girl who thought love had to be earned. That silence was safety. That scars made me unworthy. But you, my love, have come into a world where love is loud, safety is real, and every mark tells a story of survival, not shame." She tucked the letter into a wooden box marked for later. Being Mimi wasn't about being perfect. Christina still had days where old ghosts whispered, nights where sleep came slow. But when Ella toddled across the garden in her rubber boots, Christina felt something settle inside her chest. Peace, the kind that plants itself deep, the kind that no storm can shake. She taught Ella how to make rosemary biscuits, how to smell the rain before it arrived, how to say I'm sorry without fear, and I love you without waiting. One day, while they were watering the tomatoes, Ella looked up and asked Mimi, "Were you always happy?" Christina paused, wiped her hands on her apron, and knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart, not always, but I always hoped I could be." Ella thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll help." Christina laughed, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "You already are." That night, Ruthme watched them from across the fence, heart swollen with something close to reverence. Some people heal loudly, some quietly. Christina had done both. And in the laughter of her granddaughter, the scent of rosemary on her fingertips, and the softness of being called Mimi, she had found the life she once wrote about in secret. Not perfect, but whole. It started with a candle, lavender and vanilla, poured into a recycled jar, a small tag tied with twine. On the label, Christina had written "Grace Light," for nights that need gentleness. She gave it to Hannah, her old roommate from the center, as a birthday gift. Hannah lit it that night and texted her a picture of the flame. "It smells like hope," she wrote. Christina didn't plan to start a business, but a week later, Hannah posted about the candle online. Then a neighbor ordered 5 for a church retreat. Then Joe from Petal and Stem called and said, "I want your candles in my window." So Christina poured more. She chose each scent like she chose words once carefully, honestly. One blend she called Steady Heart Eucalyptus and Sage. Another was Still Here Chamomile Rose, and something soft and hard to name. Each candle came with a note. "If you're holding this, you've survived something. You are not alone. Light this when the world feels heavy. Let it remind you that healing is slow, but it burns steady." She never included her full story, not in the packaging, but sometimes when customers wrote to her, "This helped me through my divorce," or "My daughter lights yours every night after therapy," she'd send a personal reply. And just once, she received a letter from a woman who wrote, "My mother threw away every journal I ever kept, but your candle reminded me that I can still write again." Christina cried that night, not from sadness, but because she remembered the way her own journal had once been reduced to ash. Now her words burned safely, intentionally, in hundreds of homes she'd never visit. Ben built her a studio in the garage, shelves lined with wax oils jars. The boys helped with labels. Ella loved sticking the tags and pretending she was chief of quality control. And once a year, Christina held a community workshop. Nothing formal. Just a folding table at the library, a kettle of tea blank paper, and the question, what would you say to your younger self? Some wrote letters, others sat in silence, but everyone left with a candle and a small card that read, "You are the light." One evening after a workshop, an older woman approached Christina. Her hands trembled as she held her candle. "I lost my voice a long time ago," she whispered. "But tonight I think I found its echo in you." Christina reached out, gently covered her hands. "You never lost it," she said. "It just needed quiet to come home." That night, as she sat in her garden, the scent of rosemary in the breeze, Christina lit one of her first candles, slightly uneven wick, too short. It flickered stubbornly, but it burned. And as the flame glowed against the soft dusk, she whispered, "This is what surviving looks like when it becomes sharing. This is what grace smells like when it burns." I saw her last week, Christina. She was standing at the community fair beside a folding table lined with candles and soft blue cards. A little sign read, "Grace Light Stories You Can Hold." She had silver strands in her braid now, a laugh line near her eyes, and a calmness that wrapped around her like an old quilt. The kind passed down through generations, not perfect, but warm. Ella ran circles around her legs, giggling with a paper pinwheel. Matthew was nearby, helping an elderly woman carry her tote. Theo leaned against the tree sketching sunflowers. I watched Christina hand a candle to a young woman in her 20s, shoulders tense, eyes darting. Christina didn't ask questions, just offered the candle and said softly, "You don't have to tell me what happened. I believe you anyway." The girl began to cry, and Christina did what she'd once longed for anyone to do for her. She stayed. No fixing, no preaching, just presence. Later, when the sun began to set and the fair lights blinked on, Christina sat beside me on the bench near the lemonade stand. She handed me a candle. "Steady heart," the label said. "I'm getting older," she whispered, watching the lights dance across Ella's curls. "But the flame's still here." I nodded, and brighter than ever. We sat in silence for a while, comfortable, familiar. Then she said something I've never forgotten. "When I was a girl, I thought surviving meant never breaking. Now I know. Surviving is learning how to gather the pieces. And light. It's what we leave behind in the hands of others." I looked at her, this woman who once curled into silence and now stood in front of crowds. And I thought, this is what strength looks like when it's soft. The kind of strength that doesn't shout, that doesn't erase scars, but carries them gently like a lantern on a dark road for the next traveler to follow. So if you ever find a candle labeled Grace Light, know this. It was poured by a woman who walked through fire. It was shaped by hands that once trembled, and it carries a flame that never asked for permission to keep burning. Because sometimes healing isn't loud. It's steady, like a light that stays. I never thought I'd be the one to tell this story. For so long, I believed silence was safer. But looking back now, I see that every word I once buried was just waiting to bloom. From a scared little girl in a quiet room, to a mother who learned to love without fear, to a grandmother who lights candles for strangers and calls it healing. What I've learned is this: we don't heal by forgetting. We heal by remembering gently, by holding our scars not as shame, but as proof that we're still here. No matter how broken you feel, there's still a flame inside you. Maybe small, maybe flickering, but it's real. And that light, it's not just for you. It's for someone else who's still walking in the dark. So if my story touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts in the comments or pass this story along to someone who might need a little grace today. And remember, no matter how heavy the past, love lights the way forward. Thank you for listening. You were never alone.